The first kid disappeared on my third day. Not permanently, not officially. By morning, he was back in his cabin, asleep in his bunk like nothing had happened. But for 6 hours, 23 counselors for camp directors and 2 sheriff's deputies searched nearly 500 acres of forest and couldn't find him. And when they asked where he'd been, he gave an answer that made every staff member in the room go silent. He said, "I was with the other camp." Then he smiled and asked why everyone looked scared. That was the first time I learned the rules weren't meant to protect the campers. They were meant to protect us. The camp sat deep in southern Ohio. 300 acres of forest, a private lake, archery ranges, hiking trails, cabins scattered among the trees. The kind of place parents loved. No cell service, no traffic, no distractions, just nature. I was 22, fresh out of college, broke, and looking for a summer job. The pay wasn't great, but housing and meals were included. It sounded easy. Keep kids entertained. Lead activities. Watch campfires. Simple. On orientation day, every counselor received a handbook, schedules, emergency contacts, safety procedures, normal stuff, except for 1 page stapled to the back. 5 rules. No title, no explanation, just 5 rules. Rule 1. If a camper tells you they saw another camp across the lake, report it immediately. Do not ask questions. Rule 2. If you hear the dinner bell ring after midnight, stay inside your cabin. Rule 3. Never count campers after sunset. Only verify names. Rule 4. If a child returns missing belongings they never borrowed, thank them and walk away. Rule 5. If you see someone standing on the dock after lights out, do not approach, even if they ask for help. I thought it was camp folklore, a tradition, something designed to spook new hires. The older counselors didn't seem amused, though. Whenever someone joked about the rules, the veterans became uncomfortable, especially around Rule 5. Nobody liked discussing Rule 5. I didn't understand why. Not then. My first 2 days were completely normal. Campfires, swimming, nature hikes, arts and crafts, everything you'd expect. Then Ethan disappeared. Ethan was 9, quiet kid, brown hair, glasses, loved fishing. Around 8 p.m., his cabin leader realized he wasn't present for evening activities. At first, nobody panicked. Kids wander off constantly. Bathrooms, trails, dining hall, no big deal. 20 minutes later, we started searching. An hour later, panic set in. By midnight, the entire camp was looking. By 2 a.m., local authorities arrived. Still nothing. No footprints. No torn clothing. No signs of an accident. It was like the kid had vanished. Then at sunrise, he walked out of his cabin, stretching, yawning, completely normal. Everyone rushed toward him, demanding answers, asking where he'd been. Ethan seemed confused, like we were the strange ones. Then he said, "I was at the other camp." The room went silent. Even the sheriff stopped writing. Ethan continued, "There were lots of kids there, lots of counselors. They said they see us all the time." One of the directors immediately ended the conversation, sent Ethan away, told everyone to return to work. That should have been the end of it. Except that afternoon, I noticed something strange. Ethan wasn't wearing his glasses, the same glasses he'd had all week. Instead, he wore a different pair. Similar, but not identical. The frames were slightly darker. When I asked about them, he looked confused. "I've always had these." Then he walked away. That night, I asked one of the senior counselors about the other camp. The color drained from her face. She immediately asked where I'd heard that phrase. When I explained, she simply said, "If a camper mentions another camp, don't ask questions." Then she left. No explanation. Nothing. The second incident happened a week later, and it involved Rule 2. The dinner bell. Every evening at 6, the dining hall bell rang. Simple. Normal. Except one night, I woke up at 1:17 a.m. The bell was ringing. Dong, dong, dong. Loud, clear, impossible. At first I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard cabin doors opening. Footsteps outside. Children moving. My heart immediately started racing. Rule 2. If you hear the dinner bell after midnight, stay inside. I rushed to the window. Several campers were already walking toward the woods. Not the dining hall, the woods. They moved slowly, silently, like sleepwalkers. Dozens of them. Cabin after cabin. Kids leaving. No counselors. No staff. Just children. Following something. Then I saw who was leading them. A woman. Standing at the edge of the tree line. Wearing an old camp uniform. The style looked decades outdated. She held a lantern. And every child was following her. I nearly ran outside. Then remembered the rule. Stay inside. For the next 20 minutes, I watched helplessly as nearly 40 children disappeared into the forest. Then the bell stopped. Everything became silent. Around 3 a.m., the children returned, one by one, walking back to their cabins. Still silent. Still expressionless. The next morning, nobody remembered leaving. Not a single camper. The administration claimed it was sleepwalking, mass suggestion, group behavior. I didn't believe them, especially after I checked attendance photos. Because one of the children who returned wasn't on the roster. At least not anymore. The girl appeared in group photographs, activity logs, camp records, yet her name had been crossed out years earlier. Next to the note, missing, July 1998. And somehow she was back, still attending camp, like she'd never left. That's when I started realizing something terrifying. The camp wasn't isolated from whatever was happening. It was connected to it, built around it. And the 5 rules weren't random. They were survival instructions. The third rule was the one that truly broke my understanding of reality. Because one night, I accidentally counted the campers after sunset and discovered there were more children than there should have been. Much more. Equals. I broke rule 3 by accident. That's the part that still bothers me. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't stupidity. I simply forgot. The camp had just finished a huge bonfire event. Over 100 kids, dozens of counselors, everyone moving around in the dark. One of the younger campers tripped and hurt his ankle, so the staff began organizing everyone back into their cabins. The director shouted across the field, "Make sure everybody's accounted for." Simple instruction, normal procedure. So I did what every counselor naturally does. I counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. The kids walked past carrying flashlights. 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42. I stopped. My stomach tightened. There should have been 39, not 42. I counted again. 42. 3 extra children. At first I assumed I was mistaken. The lighting was terrible. People were moving. Easy mistake. Then one of the extra kids turned toward me and smiled. I had never seen him before. Not during activities. Not during meals. Not during orientation. Nothing. Yet he wore a camp shirt, a camp wristband, a camp name tag. Everything looked legitimate. The name tag read, Jacob. The problem was that there wasn't a Jacob at camp. I knew because I had spent the previous week memorizing every cabin roster. The boy continued smiling, then walked into cabin 8, like he belonged there. The next morning, I checked the attendance sheet. Jacob was listed, along with 2 other names I'd never seen before. The paperwork looked authentic. Birth dates, emergency contacts, medical information, everything. Yet none of those names had existed the day before. I knew that. I was certain. When I asked the camp administrator about it, she stared at me for several seconds, then asked a question. Did you count them? The blood drained from my face. She already knew. Before I answered, before I explained anything, she knew. I admitted what happened. Her reaction terrified me. Not because she seemed surprised, because she seemed disappointed, like a teacher dealing with a student who should have known better. Then she quietly said, "Don't count them again." That was all. No explanation, no discussion. Just don't do it again. The 3 new campers remained at camp for the rest of the session. Nobody questioned them. Nobody noticed them. Nobody except me. And the more I watched them, the more wrong they felt. They participated in activities, ate meals, joined games, everything normal. Yet I never saw them arrive, never saw them leave, never saw parents, never saw luggage, nothing. And whenever I looked away and then back again, they seemed slightly different. Hair lengths changed, eye colors shifted, facial features moved, tiny inconsistencies, like reality couldn't quite decide what they looked like. Then came Rule 4, the rule I thought made the least sense. If a child returns missing belongings they never borrowed, thank them and walk away. I finally understood that rule on July 18th. I was sitting in the staff lodge filling out paperwork. A camper named Olivia knocked on the door. Sweet kid, 10 years old, always polite. She held out a flashlight. My mom said this belongs to you. I immediately recognized it. My flashlight. The problem was that I'd lost it 3 years earlier. 3 years. Not 3 weeks. Not 3 months. 3 years. I'd lost it during a camping trip in Kentucky. Completely unrelated to this camp. Completely unrelated to Ohio. Yet here it was. The same scratches. The same dent near the battery cap. Even my initials carved into the side. I stared at it, unable to speak. Olivia smiled. She said, "You dropped it." "Ooh, my mom." I felt cold immediately. Olivia's mother had died when she was 6. Everyone at camp knew that. It was listed in her records. Olivia continued smiling, completely unaware anything was wrong. She wanted me to give it back. Rule 4 flashed through my mind. Thank them and walk away. I forced a smile, took the flashlight, said thank you, then left. I didn't stop walking until I reached the administration building. The flashlight sat on my desk for 2 days. I refused to touch it. Then on the 3rd night, it turned itself on. At exactly 2:03 a.m., the beam pointed directly toward the lake, toward the dock, toward Rule 5. The rule everybody feared. The rule nobody discussed. I finally learned why on my 41st day at camp. Because around midnight, a camper went missing again. A little girl named Sophie, 8 years old, gone. No trace, no footprints, no signs of wandering, nothing. The staff immediately started searching. Cabins, trails, fields, everywhere. Then one counselor came running back. White as a ghost, unable to speak. Finally, he pointed toward the lake, the dock. Everyone looked, and there she was, standing at the very end of the dock, perfectly still, facing the water. Sophie. We all started moving immediately. Then the camp director screamed, "Stop!" The force in her voice froze everyone. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The director looked terrified, not concerned. Terrified, because Sophie wasn't alone. Someone stood beside her. A woman, tall, thin, wearing an ancient camp uniform. The same woman I'd seen leading children into the forest after the midnight bell. The lantern woman. Only now I could see her face, and I immediately wished I couldn't, because her face kept changing. Every second, different eyes, different mouths, different ages. Hundreds of faces flickering across the same skin, like a slideshow of stolen identities. The woman slowly turned toward us, then smiled, and Sophie smiled too, at the exact same moment, the exact same expression, the exact same angle, like mirrors. Then the lantern woman reached out and took Sophie's hand. The camp director immediately ordered everyone back. No arguments, no hesitation. Back to the cabins, back inside. Lock every door, close every curtain. Nobody slept. At sunrise, Sophie was back in her bunk. Safe, healthy, normal. Except she wasn't normal. Not really, because Sophie remembered everything. And what she described changed the camp forever. She said the woman had taken her to another camp. A camp across the lake. A camp where every missing camper still lived. And according to Sophie, they've been waiting for us. The moment Sophie said that, the room went silent. Not the uncomfortable kind of silence. The kind that happens when everyone hears something they've been afraid of for years. The camp director immediately ended the interview, sent Sophie back to her cabin, locked the office door, then called an emergency staff meeting. No campers, no junior counselors, only senior staff. For the first time since I'd arrived, nobody pretended the rules were a joke. Nobody pretended everything was normal. The director stood at the front of the room, holding a folder so old the edges were yellow. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Missing children, missing counselors, missing staff members. Some dated back to the 1960s. Others were recent, but they all had something in common. Every single one had disappeared from camp, and every single one had eventually mentioned the same thing before vanishing. The other camp. The director spread the photographs across the table. Then she asked us a question. Do any of these people look familiar? At first, I didn't understand. Then I started looking closer. My blood turned cold, because I recognized several faces. Not from the photographs, from camp. Children I'd seen walking around. Counselors I'd passed near the dining hall. People who were supposedly missing for decades. One photo showed a boy who vanished in 1987. I'd seen him fishing near the lake 3 days earlier. Another showed a counselor missing since 2003. I'd waved to her outside cabin 12 last week. The director noticed my expression, then nodded slowly. You've started seeing them. Nobody else reacted, which meant they already knew. One counselor quietly asked, "How many are there now?" The director answered immediately, "More than last summer." Nobody asked what that meant. Nobody wanted clarification, because deep down we all understood. The camp wasn't losing people. It was accumulating them, and something else was growing alongside them. That night, nobody was allowed near the lake. Extra staff patrolled every cabin. Additional locks were installed. Floodlights illuminated the shoreline. It didn't matter. At 1:04 a.m., the dinner bell rang again. Dong, 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 louder than I'd ever heard it. The sound echoed across the entire camp. Then every floodlight shut off simultaneously. Darkness swallowed everything. Children immediately began screaming. Counselors rushed through the cabins, trying to calm everyone down. Outside, the bell continued ringing. Dong, dong, dong. And through the windows, I saw movement. Hundreds of lanterns, floating among the trees, approaching the camp. Not carried, floating, like stars drifting through the forest. Every lantern contained a figure walking beside it. Adults, children, counselors, campers, an entire crowd moving silently through the woods. Toward us, the other camp. They weren't hiding anymore. They were coming closer, much closer. One of the younger counselors made a terrible mistake. He ran outside, ignoring every warning, ignoring every rule, ignoring the screaming staff trying to stop him. I watched from the cabin window. He sprinted toward the tree line, toward the lanterns, toward the crowd. For a moment, nothing happened. Then someone stepped out of the darkness. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, holding a lantern. The counselor slowed down, spoke to her. The girl pointed toward the woods and smiled. Then they walked away together, into the darkness. Neither was ever seen again. The following morning, all evidence of the incident vanished. The floodlights worked perfectly. The bell remained untouched. No footprints, no damaged equipment, nothing. Only one thing remained. A new name appeared on Cabin 3's attendance roster. A counselor, listed as active staff. The same counselor who had disappeared. According to camp records, he'd worked there for 5 years. According to photographs, he'd attended dozens of staff events. According to payroll records, he'd never gone missing. Reality itself had changed. Like the camp was rewriting history. Adding people, removing people, correcting itself. That realization destroyed what little sense of safety I had left. Because if records could change, memories could too. And that's exactly what started happening. I began forgetting things. Small things first. Conversations, names, dates, then larger things. Entire days, entire shifts, entire events. Sometimes I'd wake up in my cabin with no memory of how I'd gotten there. Other counselors experienced the same thing. One girl forgot her own hometown. Another forgot she'd ever attended college. A third forgot her younger brother existed. The camp was taking pieces, slowly, methodically, like something was preparing room for something else. Then I discovered the truth hidden beneath the camp. And that's when everything became worse. Because one stormy night, lightning struck an old maintenance shed near the lake. The fire department arrived quickly. The damage wasn't severe, but the strike exposed something underneath the structure. A staircase, buried beneath the ground. A staircase that wasn't on any camp map. A staircase leading down, far down, into darkness. The camp director ordered the area sealed immediately. Nobody was allowed near it, which naturally meant I couldn't stop thinking about it. 3 nights later, I returned alone, flashlight in hand, heart racing. The entrance stood partially covered by tarps. I slipped inside and began descending. The stairs continued much farther than they should have. Beneath the lake, beneath the camp, beneath the forest. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. Then I reached the bottom and found something impossible. An entire second camp, hidden underground, cabins, fire pits, dining halls, archery ranges, everything perfectly preserved. And every building was occupied, not by strangers, by the missing, thousands of them, all watching me, all smiling. And standing at the center of the underground camp was the Lantern Woman, waiting, like she'd known I was coming. To be continued. The Lantern Woman stood in the center of the underground camp with hundreds of people gathered behind her. None of them moved. None of them blinked. Thousands of eyes fixed on me, waiting. The underground camp stretched farther than my flashlight could reach. Rows of cabins disappeared into darkness. Campfires burned without smoke. Lanterns hung from trees that shouldn't have existed underground. Everything looked wrong. Not broken, not abandoned. Wrong. Like someone had rebuilt a summer camp entirely from memory and gotten certain details slightly off. The cabins were too tall. The pathways curved where they should have been straight. The trees leaned toward the center of camp, toward the Lantern Woman, toward me. I should have run. Instead, I stood there staring, because among the crowd, I recognized faces. Ethan, Sophie, the counselor who disappeared during the Bell incident, children from photographs, counselors missing for decades, people who should have been dead, people who should have been old, yet none of them had aged. A camper missing since 1974 still looked 12. A counselor lost in 1989 still looked 21. Time hadn't touched them. The Lantern Woman smiled, then spoke. For the first time, I heard her voice clearly. And it wasn't one voice. It was hundreds, layered together. Male, female, young, old, thousands speaking through the same mouth. You finally came. The crowd smiled wider. Every face identical now. Every expression matching perfectly. I took a step backward. The crowd took a step forward. Not walking, gliding, like they were being pulled. The Lantern Woman raised her hand. Everyone stopped. Instantly. Then she asked a question. Do you know why the rules exist? I didn't answer. She continued anyway. They were never meant to keep us out. Something moved behind her. The crowd slowly parted, revealing a structure deeper within the underground camp. A tower. My stomach dropped, because it looked exactly like the fire tower from Tower 7. The same design, the same stairs, the same observation room, except older, much older, and damaged, like the original version. Then I noticed something even worse. The tower wasn't alone. Behind it stood dozens more. Watchtowers, lighthouses, cabins, ranger stations, pieces of every horror story I'd ever heard from old staff members. Every strange location, every place connected to disappearances, all gathered underground. Connected, one impossible landscape. That's when I understood. The camp wasn't the source. The camp was a doorway, one of many. The Lantern Woman watched realization spread across my face, then nodded. Now you understand. No, the word escaped before I could stop it. No, I don't. The Lantern Woman smiled. You will. The crowd began moving again, slowly surrounding me. Hundreds, thousands, closing every possible exit. I raised my flashlight. The beams swept across the faces, and something finally clicked. They weren't prisoners. None of them looked frightened. None looked trapped. They looked happy, content, almost relieved, like they had escaped something terrible. The Lantern Woman pointed upward, toward the ceiling, toward the world above. The other side forgets. The crowd murmured agreement. Thousands of whispers. The other side dies. More whispers. The other side disappears. Then she stepped closer, and for the first time, her face stopped changing. It became one face. My face. Exactly mine. Same scar. Same eyes. Same expression. The thing standing before me wasn't copying me anymore. It was me, or at least a version of me, one that had been there much longer. The realization nearly broke me. The Lantern Woman leaned forward and whispered, "You've been here before." My heart stopped. "No, you have. No." The crowd began smiling again. Thousands of matching smiles. The underground camp shifted. The cabins changed. The trees moved. Reality bent. And suddenly memories appeared. Not dreams. Not visions. Memories. Standing beside the lake as a child. Attending camp. Walking into the woods. following lantern light, descending stairs, meeting people underground. I'd never attended this camp. At least I thought I hadn't. But the memories felt real. Terrifyingly real. The lantern woman watched me struggle. Then she said something that shattered everything. "You weren't hired here." The crowd laughed softly. A horrible sound. "You returned." Images flooded my head. Years of missing memories. Missing summers. Missing pieces of childhood. The reason Ohio had always felt familiar. The reason the lake looked familiar. The reason the rules seemed familiar the first day I read them. I had been there before. A long time ago. And somehow, I had left. Something almost nobody ever did. The lantern woman reached out. Her hand touched my forehead. Instantly, the underground camp disappeared. I found myself standing on the dock above ground. Moonlight reflected across the lake. The normal camp sat behind me. Silent. Empty. Across the water stood another camp. The other camp. Lanterns glowed among the cabins. Children ran across fields. Counselors gathered around campfires. An entire world existing where no world should be. The lantern woman stood beside me, looking across the water. Everyone thinks they're losing people. I couldn't speak. They're not. The camp across the lake brightened. Hundreds of lanterns illuminating the shoreline. They're choosing. My throat tightened. Choosing what? The lantern woman looked directly at me. Where they belong. Then she pointed toward the other shore. And I saw them. Thousands of people. Every missing camper. Every missing counselor. Every missing hiker. Every missing ranger. Every missing person. Watching from the opposite bank. Not trapped. Waiting. For me. And somewhere among them, I saw myself again. Smiling. Waving. Like I've been expecting this moment all along. Then, the dinner bell rang. Dong. 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 And for the first time, I found myself wanting to follow it. The bell kept ringing. Dong. 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 Each strike felt less like a sound and more like a memory. Something old. Something buried. Something that had been waiting years to wake up. The other version of me still stood across the lake, smiling, waiting. The lantern woman said nothing. She didn't need to. For the first time since arriving at camp, I understood why people followed the bell. The feeling wasn't fear. It wasn't mind control. It was recognition. Like hearing your name spoken from another room. Like finally remembering something you'd forgotten your entire life. I took one step toward the water, then another. The lake remained perfectly still. No waves, no wind, no insects, nothing. The entire world seemed to be holding its breath. Then a voice shouted behind me. My real name. Not counselor, not ranger. My name. I turned. The camp director stood at the edge of the dock, holding a lantern. The first time I'd ever seen her carrying one. Her face looked exhausted, older somehow, as if years had suddenly caught up to her. Don't go. The lantern woman smiled. The camp director raised her lantern higher. Immediately, the figure beside me took a step back. Interesting. The lantern woman didn't like the light. Not that light. The director slowly approached. I wonder when they come for you. My head was spinning. What are they? The director looked toward the other camp, toward the impossible shoreline, then answered quietly. They're what's left. Left of what? She hesitated for several seconds, like she genuinely didn't know, or didn't want to remember. Finally, she whispered, Us. The word hit harder than anything else. The lantern woman laughed softly. The sound echoed across the lake, and suddenly thousands of lanterns lit up on the opposite shore. One after another, one after another, one after another, until the entire horizon glowed. Thousands. No, tens of thousands. Far more people than had ever disappeared from this camp. Far more than any missing persons database could explain. The camp director saw my expression, then nodded. Now you understand why we have rules. I finally did. The rules weren't protecting people from monsters. The rules were preventing contact, preventing recognition, preventing something from noticing you. Because once it noticed you, it never stopped. The bell finally ceased ringing. Silence returned. The lantern woman began fading, not disappearing, becoming transparent. Like fog, the other camp started fading too. The shoreline blurred. The lanterns dimmed. The impossible world retreated. But before it vanished completely, the other version of me spoke. Across the entire lake. Across impossible distance. I heard every word clearly. "We'll see you next summer." Then everything disappeared. The lake became normal again. The camp became normal again. And the dock stood empty. The director immediately ordered me off the shoreline. No questions. No arguments. I followed. Because for the first time in my life, I was genuinely terrified. Not of what I'd seen, of what I'd felt. Part of me had wanted to stay. That feeling never completely went away. The rest of the summer passed quietly. No more disappearances. No more midnight bells. No more sightings, at least officially. But strange things kept happening. Children occasionally asked why the camp across the lake wasn't open. Parents mentioned kids talking about counselors they'd never met. Attendance records changed. Photographs changed. Names appeared and vanished. The usual things. Things nobody discussed anymore. When August ended, I resigned. Packed my belongings. Left Ohio. Never planned on returning. The camp director didn't try to stop me. In fact, she looked relieved. Like she'd been hoping I'd make that choice. Before I left, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph. Old. Faded. Taken sometime in the 1980s. A group of campers standing beside the lake. Dozens of smiling children. Counselors. Staff. Normal. At first. Then I noticed someone standing in the back row. A child. Maybe 10 years old. Wearing an old camp shirt. The child was me. Not someone who looked similar. Me. The same face. The same eyes. The same scar on my chin. A photograph taken years before I was born. I never contacted the camp again. Never spoke about what happened. Never returned. For a while, life became normal. Or as normal as it could. Then last summer, something happened. Something that forced me to finally tell this story. I received a package. No return address. No sender. Inside was a camp handbook. The same one from my first year. The same rules. The same yellow paper. Only this version contained something different. A sixth rule. One I had never seen before. One that hadn't existed. Or maybe had always existed. I honestly don't know anymore. The sixth rule read, if a former staff member receives an invitation, they must not return to camp. Underneath was a handwritten note. Just one sentence. A sentence written in my own handwriting. I recognized it instantly. Every letter. Every stroke. My handwriting. Not a copy. Not an imitation. Mine. The note said, you left once. Don't make the same mistake twice. I haven't slept properly since. Because 2 weeks ago another package arrived. Inside was a camp photo from this summer. Current year. Current session. Current campers. Standing near the lake. Smiling at the camera. And there, standing among the counselors, was me. Older. Thinner. Wearing a lantern around my neck. Smiling. Like I'd never left at all. The worst part isn't the photograph. The worst part is what happened yesterday. Yesterday my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. I wish I had. When I answered, all I heard was distant laughter. Children laughing. A campfire crackling. The sound of water against the dock. Then a familiar voice. My own voice. Calling from somewhere far away. Somewhere across a lake. Somewhere waiting. It said, the bell rings in 3 days. And then the call ended. 3 days from now is the first day of summer camp season. 3 days from now, somewhere deep in the Ohio woods, the dinner bell will ring again. And every night since that call, I've dreamed of lanterns. I've dreamed of the lake. I've dreamed of the other camp. But most of all, I dream of going back. And that's what scares me. Because every night the dream feels less like a nightmare and more like a memory.